I'm Louisa Barton with the Horse Talk Show, here with Linda and Pat Parelli. We're starting a little series at home with the Parellis. Going to tell you a little bit of background about them so you can learn a little bit about how they became superstars. And everybody likes to know about the beginning of great stories. So I'm here with Linda and Pat. I'm going to start with Linda and let her tell us a little bit about growing up. She had her first lesson at 9, her first pony at 12. And she was born in Singapore, grew up in Australia, and she's been around horses pretty much all of her life. It'd be interesting to hear a little bit more about her childhood. So, Linda, tell us a little bit about you.
Well, I think you pretty much summed it up. You know, I was born horse crazy, and I just pestered my parents until they gave me a horse. I was a horse. I'd have 2 sticks as my front legs and make my sister ride me around, you know. I mean, I was just horse crazy. And in Singapore, there was nowhere to have a horse. You never had a horse in your backyard, let alone, you know, a horse that you could own easily. But I finally started going to a riding club that was all British Horse Society run, and so I had, you know, pretty traditional riding lessons, and then we moved to Australia, and I just pestered my parents until they bought me a pony. And so then I got this little pony, and I just rode him like a wild Indian everywhere, in parks and in the bush. We don't call it the forest there, but the bush, and then also on the beach. And so I was so lucky to grow up like that. A lot of people don't have that.
So growing up, learning to ride, at least for me in England, it was pretty much get on the pony, you know, pick the horse's feet, brush it off, get on the pony and make it do what it's supposed to do. And if it doesn't, then you're supposed to make it do what it's supposed to do. I did not have the benefit of anything like Parelli natural horsemanship, which I had. Fortunately, I had some natural knowledge of horses that came to me from probably generations of family and background, but nothing that I could follow or learn or any instructions. Did you have anything like that? And how did you deal with your naughty ponies?
No, I mean, it's pretty much the same thing. Unless you went for regular riding lessons, you were pretty much on your own. And I was lucky enough in Australia, in Sydney, to keep my ponies on a vacant piece of land, and I tethered them. There was no stables or barn or even a fenced paddock. You know, I had them on big long ropes, and I would just move the stake and graze them all over the place. And Pony Club was really my background then. You know, I'd go to meetings once a month and go to gymkhanas and little horse shows that they put on. But that was pretty much it. You know, that was the extent of my riding lessons. And it was the same thing. It's not really horsemanship and horse psychology, certainly as we talk about it today. But it was riding lessons. You know, sit up straight, put your heels down, shoulders back, you know, ride in a straight line. And I remember even going to competitions, and I loved the gymkhanas because you just go fast and run around barrels and things. But, you know, I remember going into the showing part, or hacking, and, you know, you had to look really nice for the judge, and your outside leg would be going, you know, banging on the horse. It's like, you behave and you go forward. But on the inside, it's like, oh, you know, look how nice my horse is. And so but, you know, so much of it was just kind of fun. And even though I loved the competition, it wasn't until I was a little bit older and I got my second horse that I started to get a little bit more competitive. And then, you know, as things go, I went to university and then started on my career. And I stopped riding horses, and my ponies retired to my parents' farm. And then when I was in my, early 30s, late 20s, I got a horse again after a 7-year hiatus. And that was the reason I met Pat.
It was probably the worst 7 years too, not having a horse, right?
Terrible. It was terrible because, you know, well, everybody who's horse crazy knows that. You know, you're still watching horse racing or watching anything that's got horses or reading things that have horses in it. And finally, one day I just thought, you know, I have to have a horse in my life again. And that's how I ended up with the horse that made me go to a cowboy and a horseman for advice.
I loved the gymkhanas too. They were the most fun, weren't they? Lots of fun with little ponies at the gymkhana. Great fun. So you were going to be a teacher. You were actually in university for 18 months to be a teacher, but you weren't really crazy about the curriculum. How much of that helped you with teaching, both in your makeup line, to teach people to go on and promote your makeup line, and also onward then with teaching people how to understand their horse, think like a horse? Did that help you a lot?
It helped me some. What's kind of funny is that, I didn't know what I wanted to do. And a friend of my family said, why don't you become a teacher? The hours are great and you'll have vacations and all this kind of thing. And I went, oh, that sounds like a great idea, because I didn't know what I wanted to do. But then when I was at university, it was interesting. The psychology part was really the most fascinating for me. But then I dropped out because I just got impatient with studying, and I wanted to get out in the real world and get a job and whatever. And so that's when I started in the skincare industry. But it was while I was in that education, I shouldn't say that. I got into the skincare industry, and I was a skin therapist for many years. And then the company employed me to start running their product schools. And I began to get curious about marketing and sales and even teaching, and I just kind of fell into these things that were life-changing for me. That I went to a sales seminar, and then that led me to marketing seminars, and then to people like Robert Kiyosaki and Tony Robbins and Dr. Stephanie Burns, and it was unbelievable what I started to learn about human potential and how bad most teaching is. And so it really changed my life in terms of, how do you teach people so they can really learn, not just blurt information at them. And that's where it became really, really interesting. And when I met Pat and we started to put this program together, all my preparation was there.
Absolutely. Now, we know you very well for dressage. Did you do other horse events as a child growing up? Did you do show jumping? You'd probably never heard of Western like me, right?
Well, there was a little bit of the Western, but I was so into the hacking and then Gymkhana, because my horse was messing up so bad, and I just went and galloped him one day around the barrels and went, this is much more fun. And then I wanted to event, and I did some jumping and some cross country and avoided dressage like the plague. You had to do it. And then I started to get very interested in it, first of all, because my horse was mostly out of control. And so I thought, I have to do some dressage. And I always thought, dressage is easy. It's just for riding around in circles. I had no idea. And so I became quite captivated by it and fascinated by how difficult it was to ride a circle. It's like, how can that be that hard? And so that's where that passion began. And then, of course, the horse that I had, wanted to do anything except dressage. And so the behavioral problems that I got is what led me to Pat.
Difficulties, when I think back over growing up, same thing. I didn't know how to handle difficulties. I handled them as the most natural way they came to me to deal with it, but I didn't have anybody to follow or anybody. Obviously, if you guys had already been around then, it would have been.
Yeah. And that was the thing that because I was having riding lessons regularly, dressage lessons, but when I started with Pat, I would call him about once every 2 or 3 months because I was stuck. And I had some of his videos, but they were basically like showing you what to do, but they weren't a curriculum. And so, of course, when my horse did things that weren't expected, I didn't know what to do with them. And luckily I could call Pat. But that's like a long time ago. Now we've got hundreds of thousands of students. You can't do that. And so I was very lucky. And when Pat came back and did more clinics, first of all, the information that he gave us was so deep, like it was way more than riding lessons. We really learned how to think and to puzzle solve, and I just then needed, well, where do I go next? Where do I go next? And so that's when we got together about, how can we make more advanced lessons for people instead of it just being the foundation, and how can we go in deeper and then for different disciplines and, different what we call horsenalities. And so the whole thing just grew out of that.
Absolutely incredible. We are going to close up this segment, and we're going to come right back and have Pat tell us a little bit about what it was like for Pat Parelli growing up and what his childhood was like. Looking forward to hearing about that. Stay with us on the Horse Talk Show. I'm Louisa Barton.